For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. Starting today, we are kicking off a limited edition series called 1971 War and Liberation. And who better to start off the series than Ambassador Chandrashekhar Dasgupta, who has just authored a fascinating book which not only recalls the 1971 War of Liberation in East Pakistan and the birth of Bangladesh, but also the behind the scene activity that resulted in what is called, or what I call, all of government approach that finally resulted in Pakistan's comprehensive military defeat, as well as formation of a new nation, Bangladesh, in December 1971. The celebrations for 50 years of that victory have already started on 3rd of December and will continue till 16 December, as we are aware. Ambassador Dasgupta, himself a distinguished former diplomat, our India's ambassador to China, and also someone who served in the Indian mission in the early years of Bangladesh's independence. In fact, in the first few months, he was there immediately after liberation of Bangladesh. Ambassador Dasgupta, thank you very much for your time and welcome to this program.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on the program.
Yes, indeed. In fact, this is the book that you have authored. It's making quite a lot of waves. It's called India Bangladesh Liberation War. And of course, the definitive story, as you call it. Certainly, after 50 years, I would have thought initially when I saw the announcement of the book that all that needed to be said or do on that famous War of Liberation would have been said. But I'm pleasantly surprised, I must admit, that you have broken new ground here. So I wanted to ask you first up, what was the particular reason that you wanted to write this book at this juncture? And what is the second question is, what is the underlying message that you have in this book?
Well, as you said, there have been a number of very good books written about the 1971 war. A number of distinguished military historians have written about the military planning and operations for 1971. There's a brilliant book on the international history of 1971, authored by Srinath Raghavan. So the reason why I wrote this book is because I wanted to cover a different dimension of the war. This is a book about what I call India's grand strategy in 1971, how India drew up and implemented a comprehensive and coordinated plan employing all the resources available to the state, military, diplomatic, and economic, in order to achieve a clearly defined objective. It's a story of how defense, foreign, and domestic policies were shaped and integrated so as to play a mutually supportive role in achieving an overarching political aim, the aim of speeding up the liberation of Bangladesh. So this is what you call, what you have termed an all-of-government approach. I call it a grand strategy. And it seemed to me that this was perhaps a unique occasion, the only occasion since independence when India has followed, drawn up and implemented a grand strategy for achieving political aim.
Indeed, some of it was already known. Jairam Ramesh's book also recently on P.N. Haksar covered a lot of ground that you have already covered. So what is it that makes this book unique, Mr. Dasgupta? Because, I think some of the documents that you have unearthed and some of the fascinating insider accounts that you have brought in are certainly a new revelation to me. But if you can explain it for our viewers, what exactly is that they should look for in this book when they pick this book up or buy this book?
Okay, so perhaps I should mention, some of the findings, some of the conclusions I came to in the course of my research, and conclusions which are obviously reflected in my book. In the first place, great many people in Pakistan, but not only in Pakistan, in many other countries as well, not excluding India, think that India was simply waiting for an opportunity to break up Pakistan. And the first sort of finding I came to was that this was not at all the case. We knew from 1969 that there was a definite likelihood of Pakistan's disintegration. We didn't actually want it. What we were hoping for is that the Awami League would come to power at the center in Pakistan, in Islamabad, because we thought that only a Pakistan government dominated by East Bengal, by the Bengalis of East Bengal, offered the only hope of a breakthrough in India-Pakistan relations as a whole. That the West Pakistan establishment was unshakably bent on following a confrontational policy towards India. And so what we were hoping for is that when the December 1970 elections in Pakistan gave an absolute majority to the Awami League, we were hoping that the Awami League would be allowed to form a government at the center. And this offered hope of a breakthrough in India-Pakistan relations. So that was one finding, that we didn't really want it, right up to 25th March, when Pakistan instituted this murderous, this savage, brutal crackdown, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of Bengalis and driving out 10 million of them into India. At that time, we realized that all hopes for a united Pakistan had been buried under a mountain of corpses. And we decided that we should help the Bangladeshis to speed up, the liberation struggle and bring it to an early conclusion before they left, before the end of the year. Because we thought that a long drawn-out guerrilla war might pass under the control of pro-Chinese, pro-Naxalite elements. We mustn't forget that in 1970, the Naxalite problem is a very serious one.
In Bengal, yes. In Bengal, yeah.
So the third thing is that, the story of General Manekshaw, that Indira Gandhi was very impatient. She wanted to send the troops into East Bengal in April itself. That's not really, quite the case. This is established from papers of the Prime Minister's office. Even on the 26th March, Haksar was advising the Prime Minister. In fact, this is part of a brief for her, that the political objectives will not be achieved by a precipitate, military action, because it would simply result in a loss of all international support and sympathy for the Bangladesh cause. But quite apart from papers in the PMO, we have a record, which makes it very clear that the primacy of the political factor in determining the date was clear also to the Directorate of Military Intelligence, in other words, to Army headquarters. We have the account of Major General Sukhwant Singh, who was the Deputy DMO in 1971, and who's the author of an excellent book on the 1971 war. And General Sukhwant Singh writes, he first explains Manekshaw's military rationale for not wanting an immediate war. But then he goes on to say that the clinching issue was political. And I quote from his book, page 20 of his book,
Right.
quote, political compulsions clinched the issue. If the creation of an independent Bangladesh was achieved by Indian military action, how was its domestic and external viability to be assured without its recognition by the international forum, the United Nations? If India intervened without clearly justifying the action in foreign eyes, the charge that it was engineering the breakup of Pakistan would be established, and Bangladesh would be refused recognition by the majority of nations.
To be fair, Ambassador Dasgupta, I think there are some accounts of Manekshaw's close aides who have spoken about that particular meeting, where he also speaks about how the troops were scattered all over the country. The elections had just been held; they had to be brought back. Planning had to be done. So he would have given his professional opinion about why it couldn't be gone. Whether or not it was a clinching argument, we do not know. And I think subsequently it became a colorful tale. And I
Yes,
think earlier other people have spoken about it, that it wasn't his argument that clinched the decision. It's a combination of all, like you've already said. It was a grand
precisely.
strategy, and everyone's inputs were taken in there. So I think you have to give it to the army headquarters, especially that they saw that there was no need to hurry into East Pakistan, because there was no support, international support, and neither was the military ready. I think let's accept that and move on
Absolutely.
to.
Absolutely. You are absolutely correct. Manekshaw's military advice was very sound. There's no question. What I think, I mean, where he errs is imputing to Indira Gandhi, this idea that the army should go straight in,
No,
without
I think
preparation. That is what is wrong, not the military dimension. He
that
didn't
became a
understand
folklore. That became a
political
folklore.
compulsions. That
That
became the
became a
fault.
folklore. Yeah, that became a
Exactly.
folklore. So
Precisely.
yeah, in fact, I've seen other accounts, in fact, where it says that he also in that same meeting, perhaps, or some other cabinet meeting, he turns around towards, I think, YB Chavan, who was the finance minister, and says that the tanks are not ready because you've not given me the money. When he was asked, "Where are your tanks?" So there were multiple inputs, I'm sure, which have not
Exactly.
covered there. So I take your point that later it became a folklore. But moving on, what I wanted to ask you also about this grand strategy. I have spoken about this at various places. That a lot of people say that Kargil was a very good example of using the media and the information warfare. I thought one of the lesser known or lesser understood or lesser focused aspects of the 1971 grand strategy was also to create an atmosphere for support to India and demonize Pakistan in a way. Would you agree that all that was done with a great planning and forethought?
In 1971, yes.
71. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Uh, Diplomatic moves were very closely coordinated with military moves. So, what were the diplomatic moves? In the first place, uh, we had to build up international support and sympathy for the Bangladesh cause. Of course, the Bangladeshis did it themselves. People who defected from Pakistan embassies, Bangladeshi scholars, private citizens all over the world did it, but we had a great contribution to that, building up international support. Secondly, after the support had been built up, um, we had to make out a case for intervention, towards the end of the year. And we did this by emphasizing that this was not any longer an internal affair of Pakistan exclusively.
Correct.
That Pakistan was exporting its internal difficulties to India, its domestic problems to India, by driving out millions of refugees into India, and thereby creating instability and a potential security threat to our eastern regions. This was the justification for intervention in the final stages. Thirdly, we had to ensure continuous, uninterrupted, and timely supply of military equipment. This also we achieved. And in many cases, heavy equipment was airlifted so that it arrived in a timely fashion. Next, diplomatic steps had to be taken to deter China from intervention. And finally, we had to we had to ensure that the war was not brought to a premature conclusion by the Security Council imposing some sort of a ceasefire, before a proper conclusion could be reached. And this required the veto of a superpower. That also had to be arranged. And these were very complicated actions which were taken. The Russian assurance on the veto arrived only on 30th November, on the eve of the war.
Despite the treaty in August, despite the Indo-Soviet friendship treaty.
In August, when we signed the treaty, that served the purpose of a deterrence to China. Right. It also ensured timely supplies of weapons. In fact, I might also mention that immediately after signing, we took up the question of oil supplies. What if an oil embargo was imposed on India by countries sympathetic to Pakistan? And we asked the Soviets to send Iraqi oil, which they were buying, to ship the Iraqi oil to India in the event of an embargo. So all these steps have been thought out in advance. And there was this tremendous coordination between diplomatic and military moves.
Indeed. In fact, before I move on to a question that I have, a couple of questions, there is one very interesting question from our viewer, which we take live. And this is the question, if you can read it. How was civil-military relations during the period, leaving aside Indira Gandhi-Manekshaw relations with the rest of the establishment? If you could throw some light on this briefly, Ambassador.
Yes, I think that it was almost exemplary, working within the limitations imposed by the Indian government structure. By which I mean that, in India, I think there is a totally excessive separation of military and other policies. I mean, foreign policy, for example, finance, home, etc.
Right.
I think we need, for example, an integrated defense ministry with the service headquarters. Civilians do not have an adequate understanding of military operations and the requirements of military operations. And likewise, the military often does not have a full appreciation of diplomatic, domestic security, etc., other issues. We need more interaction. In 1971, there was very close cooperation on a personal basis. It so happened that the principal civilian and military policymakers, Manekshaw in particular, had excellent personal relations with the leading civilians, namely D.P. Dhar, P.N. Haksa, and the Foreign Secretary T.N. Kaul. I can speak from personal experience that Kaul and Manekshaw were on very friendly terms.
Absolutely.
And Kaul used to tease him, because Manekshaw was a very anglicized gentleman. And Kaul used to tease him, calling Sam Bahadur Sham Babu.
That's a Bengali.
And they took it well,
Yes.
They were really on very, very good terms, very close.
There were tall personalities, no doubt. There were tall personalities.
Personalities which helped bridge this institutional deficit in 1971.
That's right. So coming to one question which always comes up when we talk about the post-liberation period, especially the Simla Agreement between India and Pakistan. And one sort of thought that has persisted is that did India let Pakistan get away lightly and not use the 93,000 prisoners, and Pakistan was on the back foot to settle Jammu and Kashmir once and for all? You have written about it in the book, but if you can tell our viewers so that their interest also gets little, piked in this.
Okay. So, in the first place, it was never Indira Gandhi's intention to convert the line of control into an international boundary. She feared that she would be accused by the opposition of having surrendered POK to Pakistan, were she to do so. What was India's war aims, India's principal war aims, related to Bangladesh, to the liberation of Bangladesh, and that aim was achieved on 16th December 1971. This is the only India-Pakistan war which has nothing to do with Kashmir. It has nothing to do with Kashmir. The war aim was different. We mustn't forget that this is the only India-Pakistan war in which there was a third party, India's ally Bangladesh. And the surrender in Dhaka was not to the Indian army, it was to the joint forces of India and Bangladesh. That had already been achieved. It was not Indira Gandhi's intention to convert the new line of control into an international border. Her aim regarding Kashmir was a limited aim. That was twofold. One, to get rid of the UN-imposed ceasefire line of 1949 and by a new bilaterally negotiated line of control reflecting the ground realities of 1971. And secondly, this follows from the first, to shift to bilateral settlement of questions with Pakistan instead of going to international fora. So we did this when we got rid of the 49 line of control, and it was agreed in Simla, and by and large, we have maintained the emphasis on bilateralism in addressing India-Pakistan questions.
Yes. So the inevitable follow-up to that is this, which is again, as I can see, our viewers are firing in these questions constantly about why didn't we use the POK, as a bargaining chip, really, the POWs. I'm sorry, the prisoners of war. Why couldn't you have broadened the chicken's neck? Is what a couple of people have asked. So
the actual detailed negotiations were left to military personnel, to the army. I mean, when it came to where exactly the line of control goes, the broad framework was settled at the political level, at the diplomatic level. The details were worked out by the military, and you'd have to go to Defense Ministry and Army headquarters papers to find an answer. I do not attempt to find an answer for that.
Right.
Regarding this business of 93,000 POWs, that we had captured, they could not be used as a bargaining counter because the international law, the Geneva Conventions are very clear on this, that you cannot use POWs as a bargaining counter for political concessions. And Manekshaw himself, had repeatedly emphasized that we would follow the Geneva Conventions. When he, during the December War, when he called on the Pakistan army to surrender unconditionally, he repeatedly stated that India will abide by the provisions of international law, that is the Geneva Conventions. And then what would have happened in a future war where Indian soldiers might be taking POWs? Could they claim the protection of the Geneva Conventions if we flouted it?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So many considerations go into that. It's easy to sit on judgment there. But looking back, we're coming towards the end of the program, the time. But I have to quibble, if I may say so, as somebody who's authored different histories. In fact, in the 1965 war and a biography of R.N. Kao, there is very little mention of the role of the RNAW and two of his or three of Arenkaw's lieutenants in your book. Perhaps you didn't want to explore or go into that because some of those papers are still classified. I'm not sure what was in your mind on that. And the second was that I thought you have given little more than required importance to General J.F.R. Jacob, Major General J.F.R. Jacob, in drawing up some of the plans. As somebody who was sort of knows the military, the chief of staff certainly doesn't have that kind of thing. So I would take it with a pinch of salt that he had a big role to play in the planning. It would be Jagjit Singh Arora and perhaps the army headquarters, really, more than JFR Jacob. But nevertheless, just quick two responses from you.
So may I take the second question first?
Please,
I
please.
nowhere intended to suggest that General Jacob was the principal planner in 1971. I believe the plans were drawn up in the DMO, as is, the case. And of course, General Jacob made a very important contribution. As I said, this is not a military history. I'm not competent to form a judgment on the questions which Jacob raises in his book or in his claim to having, had a better understanding than mine.
Yes.
This is for military historians. And I have nowhere suggested that Jacob did a better job than Manekshaw.
There's much more
The
important.
plans were drawn up in the DMO. Let me go to the first question about the role of intelligence. It's a very important thing. I think my book, probably more than any other book, brings out the role of RAW. I point out that as early as in 1969, RAW had offered an assessment that Pakistan is likely to break up, and they said how? That the 6-point program has become so popular, this demand for full autonomy, that the army is going to try and crush it by the use of force. And when that happens, the East Bengal Rifles will take up arms in support of Mujib. A civil war will break out. It's a remarkable assessment. In January, RAW offers the assessment when there's a debate whether a compromise can be arrived at between Mujib and Bhutto, Mujib and the army. Cow is quite clear that this is not going to happen. Now, it was a guess, of course. It can't be anything more than that.
Sure.
So I think actually I have tried to bring out the role of R&AW. I'm not in a position to talk about individuals. You said 3 people. I knew very well Mr. P.N. Banerjee, who was the joint director in Calcutta. I have great admiration for him. But there are no documents on which I can base what I know to be the role that he played. And since my book is supported by documents, every assertion that I make has a documentary basis, I'm not in a position to say anything more about the role of R&AW. I hope one day RAW itself will throw more light on the role that it played.
That's true. No, it's fair point. In fact, because I have got some access, I have written about P.N. Banerjee or Nath Babu.
That's an excellent book about Arenkawar.
Yes, Arenkawar. Yes. It's a biography, but I have also written about P.N. Banerjee.
Yes.
Known as Nath Babu.
Yes.
In fact, his son was my boss in Telegraph in the early 90s. Bobby Banerjee. So that's how, when...
I knew him very well. Very well. And I have great admiration for him.
Yeah, his contribution is stellar.
The old IB was bifurcated into IB and R&AW. As far as I know, this is the only senior officer who was regarded as indispensable by both organizations. And they continued as joint director in both organizations.
Yes, indeed. So you're right about that. But thank you very much, Ambassador, again for this time and this discussion.
Pleasure.
And this book, certainly a definitive history. And I'm sure readers, our viewers would like to pick it up, the copy of it and read through it. I didn't want to spoil the surprises that you have. some of the surprises. This photograph itself is, I think, Mrs. Gandhi's tour, the only tour which she did when Mujib was alive, I think, to Dhaka in 1974. Is that 74 or 72? This picture,
Uh,
the
this
cover
picture.
picture, the cover picture.
Oh yes, the cover picture is the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Bangladesh, signed
1972.
in 1972.
72, right, exactly. So I can see Mr. Jain Dikshit there, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yes, he was the Deputy High Commissioner.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much, Ambassador. Thanks for your time, and good luck with your book, and greater glory to the book itself. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. So, viewers, this was the first of the three limited edition discussions that we're going to have on 1971 War and Liberation of Bangladesh. We are in the middle of the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Bangladesh. And certainly, as all of you know, and many of you, the younger people may not know, India played a stellar role in changing the geography of the subcontinent. So do keep watching. We have another veteran diplomat, G. Parthasarthi, speaking to my colleague Surya Gangadharan about the Indo-Soviet Treaty. He used to be in Moscow at that point in time. That will be coming up tomorrow, and or day after perhaps. And tomorrow we have a Bangladeshi journalist and analyst, a lady, speaking about how does Bangladesh see the liberation 50 years after it happened, when East Pakistan became Bangladesh. So do keep tuning into StratNews Global. Of course, if you have already subscribed, tell your friends and family to subscribe, and give us more subscribers on the YouTube. And of course, you know where to reach us. Keep sending feedback. And as always, your joining us live gives us a lot of insights and fresh perspective and questions. So do keep doing that. Keep the questions coming, and we will come to you with more interesting subjects and more interesting discussions. Until the next time, it's goodbye.